There's a lot of smart people in the room today, and I want you to take notes and take it away and build your businesses and your personal development from smart guys like Ron. And now we've got another smart guy, a prolific writer. He wrote the Google Definitive Book of Google, the World as We Knew It. He also wrote Three Blind Mice, which really defined the downfall of the network television business years ago. And now he's got a new book, Frenemies, which we're going to talk about a lot today. Is Ken Auletta coming up on stage? Here we go. Let's give Ken Auletta a hand. Come follow me, Ken. You're sitting here so they can shoot you and get the back of my head. Hey, pal. I could put this down, right? Ken, great to see you, and it was wonderful last night. We had our board and speaker dinner last night, which was a lot of great discussion on where the world is and where it's going. I think many of you have read the book, and by the way, we'll be giving out, Ken is kind enough to have signed some books that we'll be giving out during the day, and we'll tell you about that a little bit later. Ken, Frenemies, the name Frenemies, the genesis of the word, and the title for the book. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, Martin Sorrell, as many of you probably know, used that phrase a lot. And rather than give him credit for being the author of that phrase, I did a little research and found out that actually in 1948, Walter Winchell, the gossip columnist, created that phrase.
Walter Winchell.
And he used it to describe the United States and the Soviet Union in the Cold War were engaged in as frenemies.
Fascinating. And so Martin developed it, and it seemed like a lot of the book was about Martin and other people, and also about Michael Kasson. Was there a view as to who you were going to follow as you follow people's journey in books?
Well, if you're writing a book and you want to have more than 2 readers, you don't want to write just an essay. So you're looking to create a narrative. And you begin the book, the reporting. I wound up doing about 450 interviews, but you feel insecure at some point. My God, am I going to have a story to tell? How am I going to tell it? And about 5 or 6 months in to an almost 3-year project, I said, oh my God, Michael Kasson is just this great, delicious character at the center of so many different people. I mean, if you have a negotiation between a publishing company and an ad agency and the client, Michael Kasson is often at that table and represents all 3. And of course, you immediately think as a journalist, isn't that a conflict of interest? And he says, no interest, no conflict. And you say, what? What does that mean? And he's just the guy, when a client says to him, God, you represent everybody, why should I hire you? And he says, you want a good kisser? I'm a good kisser. and he's a very colorful guy, and I would attend their Monday meetings, staff meetings, and they would bring in their clients to talk. And so it just, for me, created a good through line. But then I used Martin Sorrell as a character, and Les Moonves, and though I didn't know anything, tell you what kind of reporter I am. I didn't know anything about Moonves.
In your book, you, as all great writers, and what you do is you take kind of a novelist's approach to nonfiction. For those of you who have read the book, one of my favorite parts is where he describes Erwin Gottlieb, who has spoken on this stage and many of us know, and he talks about how Erwin Gottlieb looks perfectly coiffed, like he just slipped out of the barber's chair. So it engages you in the reading, and then you tell the Erwin Gottlieb story. Like Tom Wolfe and other great writers, you're able to really create a picture and create a story as you're telling real life events. So tell us, in your book you describe the frenemies. Who are the frenemies today, Ken?
Well, obviously you've talked some about people who cooperate and compete, and if you look at PR agencies, as newspapers shrink, they increasingly say, hey, we got to get into the advertising business. You go to New York Times, NBC, Vice, whatever the publishing platform is, and you see, for instance, when I went to the Times for the first of several interviews, they have 300 people in their sales department. And you break it down, and 1/3 of them are creating ads. They're an ad agency at the New York Times. Vice has an ad agency who actually contributes most of their profits, or the largest bulk of their profits. But then you look at the clients increasingly taking out, as Bob Liodice's ANA has reported, increasingly taking advertising in-house. And you look at the consulting companies who used to be your advisors or accountants, and now they're in your business as well. But I think your world would miss the larger frenemy if you just focus on who competes with the ad agencies. I think the largest frenemy, and the one that's an existential threat to every one of you in this room, not to mention people outside the room who depend on advertising, is the public. The public doesn't like being interrupted by ads, particularly on the mobile phone, which is the most personal device we have outside of our wallet and our purse. And an ad feels like an interruption, which is why 20% of Americans have an ad blocker on their phone. 1/3 of Western Europeans do. If you look at Netflix, not Netflix, but at Nielsen's numbers, 55% of people who record a program on their PVRs skip the ads when they watch that program. TiVo says it's 64%.
Yeah.
And then you look at the growth of Netflix. Why is that? Because one of the reasons is that people can watch it without having 1/3 of their time eaten up by commercials.
Of course.
So that's a real issue. And as someone who's written a lot about the media in my career for the New Yorker and in books, one of the conclusions I came to, I mean, several people have said to me, you're too harsh on advertising. And I say, you're looking at much too narrowly. I said, the whole thesis of my book is that without advertising, media dies, not to mention a lot of other industries would die, as how do you communicate between seller and buyer. So I think advertising is absolutely essential, and when I looked at the numbers, the economics, I don't know how subscriptions could replace advertising, as some people say it should, because the one thing Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton agreed on in 2016 was that the working class, the American middle class, the bulk of the population, their income has been frozen for a decade.
Right.
They can't afford it.
It's a value exchange. People are getting content, entertainment, and information by accepting advertising. Although when you go to the mobile phones and you think about our screens, we're not really interrupting in a way, and people see them on their journey. A little plug for the industry. We talked about data and privacy with Bob and with Ron Kamai. You talk in the book about the privacy time bomb. Would you like to explore that a little bit?
Well, I think having spent time, my last book before this was called Googled, and I spent a lot of time with the engineers at Google. And one of the things I spent time at Facebook with the engineers, including the founders of both places, and they think of data as virtuous because it unlocks secrets, say, to consumer behavior. So they want that. They don't think about privacy. Privacy is an extraneous thought because if Facebook's case, we're going to connect all the world and people want to share information. Well, if you want to share information, then privacy is low on your totem pole. And I think increasingly, as we saw in Western Europe, which has much more of a historical tradition of privacy concern, that issue could rear up because if you look at Google and Facebook and increasingly Amazon, data and advertising is at the heart of their business. And they need to extract information. They don't want the rules that the European Union has put in place to, where people can opt out or they have to opt in, as they do in Europe. So it's I mean, I don't know whether it will come to pass, and if you listen to the dumb questions that the members of Congress asked Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh my God, with no sophistication.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite was Orrin Hatch, the senator from Utah, saying, so Mr. Zuckerberg, how do you make your money? Gee, that's right. 97% of their money comes from advertising.
Yeah, incredible. What do you think, because we had some discussion about this last night, who's most keen on GDPR type standards? Is it the public? Is it the government? There's varying views where some people say the government's really keenly interested, but the public really is not complaining about privacy because of the value exchange. What are your thoughts about government versus business versus public on that?
I don't know whether, again, as I suggested before, we don't have a tradition of privacy the way they do in the European Union. But when you go around to advertisers and clients and agencies or publishers and you ask, what is the future? How do you deal with this, with the issues of people not wanting to be interrupted? They say to you, well, the key is data. Is that more information we have about you, the more we can target ads directly at you, and they won't feel like ads because it'll feel like a service.
Right.
And as you move to that world, the question then becomes, and I give this example in the book, and I'll throw it out here. Ken, we have your GPS, you're walking, we know you bought a sport jacket at Barney's 2 months ago. You're only 2 blocks away from Barney's. If you walk the 2 blocks to Barney's, we'll give you 20% off. The question then becomes, does Ken say, oh, this is really cool, this is great, what a bargain that is? Or does Ken say, this is really creepy? How do you know so much about me? We don't know the answer to that question. But that is a fundamental question going forward. Will your thirst for more data and more ability to target at individuals excite people's fears about privacy, or will they feel it's a service? People who pretend to know the answer to that question are just pretending.
It's a great point. Some of the things we're looking at is targeting audiences as opposed to individuals, and we'll keep the PII data all anonymized and aggregated. So you touched a bit about the future of advertising. What else do you see about the next 5 to 10 years? Where does it all go on a grand scale?
One of my favorite, or least favorite moments, I really should say, is when I would often ask people I interviewed, near the end of an interview, I said, so what do you see as the future? And the person who sat looked at me and looked at my recorder. I record all my interviews, and they said, let me tell you what's going to happen in 5 years. It's going to look exactly like this. My tape recorder was still going, but I was not paying attention. Because this was a fool. This was like talking to someone on Wall Street and he says to you or she says to you, well, and let me tell you, next year this stock, if you invest today, will go up 100%. You would fire that person. Well, I felt the same way, but I didn't have the power to fire these people, but I had the power to ignore them, which is what I did. I don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you for that. We've talked about frenemies. We're going to talk about politics today. There's a tremendous amount of awful vitriol. Politicians see themselves not as competitors, but as enemies. Do you think that we could ever infuse a more frenemy-type concept into our governments?
Well, I think that President Trump has exacerbated. I mean, when you start calling people evil, Democrats, right, evil, which is what, or the press evil, right, or enemies of the people, as he calls the press, you are just polarizing it. And we, there are so many sources of information out there today. And one of the worries I have as a journalist is that going back to what former Senator Pat Moynihan would say, he would say, you're entitled to your own opinions, you're not entitled to your own facts. Well, in fact, people feel entitled to their own facts. So those who watch Fox News accept Fox News' fact. We are being invaded by the people from Guatemala through Mexico, and we need to send, as Donald Trump says, 5,000 troops there to stop them. And people who watch CNN don't feel like there's an invasion. They accept another set of facts. The New York Times, one set of facts, the New York Post, another. And I worry about the polarization, and how do you talk to people when they don't accept your facts as facts? And we're supposedly in the fact business. Mm-hmm. I think we exacerbate the problem in the press, frankly, by spending so much time on Trump, too much time on Trump. And we should be covering the rest of the world as well. And though Trump, being a narcissist, loves it.
Yeah, and a good brander for whatever qualities. He's good at branding people and themselves, and he's good in that respect. What do you think about for your next book? What new planet will you like to conquer next, Ken?
You quoted me. I like to describe what I do as visiting other planets, and one of the things you want to do is do something different. So I'm actually going to do a biography, maybe too strong a word, but of Harvey Weinstein, and follow. I've written about him before, and came real close to exposing in 2002 the sexual harassment with women, but we couldn't get any women on the record. And it's a tribute to both Ronan Farrow at the New Yorker and the New York Times reporters, that they were able to make women comfortable enough to speak out and expose what he did.
We may have time for just one question, or two if anybody's got anything, so think about it. What I'd like to say is that Ken has so kindly autographed the books, and if you drop your business card and registration out there, by the way, the great AdSpace registration, we'll be giving away some books. So any questions or thoughts at all? Okay. Ken, I really want to thank you. Always amazing, great. Last question for you that I have is, we talked about the consulting companies. They have access to C-levels, CEOs, CROs, CMOs. They have great data. They've got great number crunches. They've done strategy. Do you think they will get a leg up on the advertising world? Because certainly a lot of the media and advertising world is somewhat broken with the procurement and all the issues as we well know them. Do you think they'll grow in taking over advertising, media, programmatic digital business?
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they have deep pockets.
Right.
They have, as you suggested, relationships in the C-suite. And if you gave a truth serum to advertising agency people, or when they talk to me, oftentimes they don't want to be quoted as saying this. That's what keeps them up nights. They're worried about the consulting companies just coming at them. They worry about a lot of other things. They worry about procurement officers. They worry about the clients not trusting them. But they really do worry as a competitor, the consulting company.
Some great insights into the future of advertising. Let's give Ken Auletta a hand. That was great.